We should move to our next panelist. Esther, over to you.
All right. Yep, here we go. Slides are going up. So first of all, thank you very much to the organizers for having me, and being part of this wonderful panel is a special privilege to me. So in this brief presentation, I hope I will be able to stick with the 10 minutes. I will share some of my excitement in recent developments in global sustainability science as I've experienced them, but I will also share my concerns, some of the concerns that I also have. But I wanted to emphasize that I do this from a place of engagement, so not as a critical outsider, but as a eager and optimistic participant that hopefully will also be able to contribute to these further developments. Next slide, please. So to start off, and it's probably known to many of you, but also important to continue to realize that what we understand as global environmental science has been shaped as part of contracts, a particular idea of how to organize the relation between science and society that is often referred to as the linear model. And these quotes from the IPCC and IPBES also show that this linear model is really still alive and kicking, and there's quite good reasons for why this is the case. The main assumption being that science, provided that it is properly assessed, synthesized, communicated, I could add to that, co-produced, can and should inform decision making. Next slide, please. Now, as many have also noted, there are some problems with this reasoning, and I will mention only two here actually. Now, the first reason is that actually decision making hasn't lived up to their end of the bargain, in the sense that policy uptake of assessments is generally considered to be limited. And the question has been repeatedly asked whether we are in fact producing the right knowledge in the right way to actually catalyze action. Next slide, please. The second and related issue has also been recognized in global environmental science. Repeated calls to enhance the inclusiveness and legitimacy of knowledge by incorporating increasingly diverse forms of environmental knowledge. Next slide, please. Now there have been responses to these two problems in the science policy contracts. For example, Future Earth, as you will all know, has promoted co-production as an approach to knowledge production. Next slide, please. Another example has been the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, which has actually taken important steps to incorporate the knowledge and the needs of indigenous peoples and local communities in assessment processes, amongst others by a series of structured dialogues. Next slide, please. So while these are really important steps, we also note that deeper transformation of global environmental research priorities and approaches has been also limited. So in an article that we currently have under review at Environmental Research Letters, which is being led by Marianne Larsen, we identify 3 reasons for this lack of deeper transformation, and I'll discuss those briefly. Next slide, please. First reason is increasing confrontations with anti-science, anti-environmentalist sentiments have actually triggered responses in science to move away from engagement and from transparency. Fortunately, not everywhere, but as Latour has put it so well, calls for more transparency and openness in science, for example, about limits to knowledge or about uncertainties, are very often accompanied by a fear of public critical scrutiny and rejection, a loss of authority and power, resulting in a desire to keep the mob at bay, as he puts it. Next slide, please. Second, there is in the global science community, again for very understandable reasons, a strong commitment to a notion of a singular planet or world. And this is also reflected in the continued important role of modeling and scenario work in these global assessments. But the singular world idea, of course, is also problematic, and it is being contested related to structural and increasing inequality in who actually causes impacts and who suffers the consequences of global environmental change. The third reason, next slide, please. And this is really related to the previous point. We see that despite clear limitations, it appears that both science and policy continue to be locked in to this science policy contracts. Scientists will continue to seek policy relevance and authority, amongst others by producing the global reports that policymakers say they need. Yet as a scientific community, we have to ask ourselves what it is that we are in fact supporting by continuing to work into this locked-in situation. Next slide, please. I will conclude this presentation by suggesting that more radical changes in knowledge practices should be considered, that instead of guarding against public scrutiny, will open up further to plural perspectives, including those that we find uncomfortable or that are incommensurable with formal scientific approaches. That science can position itself as part of democratic societies instead of impartial observers of those societies, and also subject themselves to democratic norms. And that we more actively question and reflect, and this is the key and first step to the above as well. Question and reflect on what actions and whose needs are actually worth serving. Are all the research questions that societal actors ask actually worth our effort, instead of uncritically continuing to respond to global policy elites? And next question, next slide, please. So since the start of my engagement with global biodiversity science, perhaps some 8 years ago, so it has become increasingly clear to me that while transforming science is needed, and even if this need is broadly recognized, it will not come easily. As I think we are seeing in sustainability also more generally, transformation can no longer be only about having more good things, more inclusion, more justice, more equity. We can't get there, I'm starting to realize, if we don't also at the same time stop things. And this is where the call for decolonizing science becomes urgent and relevant, in my view. And I just put these quotes here because I think they're so very, very eloquent, and I won't even try to emulate that. Next slide, please. So transforming science will also require the active and conscious effort to disempower what are currently the dominant approaches to global environmental research. Providing space for what Mignolo has called epistemic disobedience, and this is deliberately provocative, of course, is where I think I would locate the current frontier in sustainability research, and particularly on the theme of linking knowledge to action. Next slide, please. Thank you.